President Trump is claiming without evidence that some of former President Joe Biden's actions are invalid because he allegedly used a machine to automate signatures on documents, which is a long-standing practice in the White House. The Statue of Liberty, you guys know the story of the Statue of Liberty, right? You know the Statue of Liberty was given to us as a gift, to make a long story short, for the Declaration of Independence. Now, the French is saying that we are no longer worthy. A French politician who is making headlines in his country. Welcome to Nurses with Voices. I'm Dr. Lendra, your host and fellow nurse who's traded in burnout for breakthroughs. I'm here to show you how to transform your nursing career into one filled with purpose, reduced stress, and incredible opportunities. Whether you're looking to start your own business, build generational wealth, or simply find a healthier role in nursing, this podcast is for you. Join me to explore practical strategies to overcome burnout, combat bias, and chart new paths in nursing. It's time to reclaim your voice and reimagine your future in healthcare. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Nurses with Voices. I'm Dr. Lendra. Today, we are bringing HillmanTok NURS201 class to Nurses with Voices podcast because, well, a tech had another plan. So we're going to make it work. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, this podcast is all about overcoming burnout, breaking barriers in healthcare, and empowering nurses like you to take your first step into nursing leadership. Now, you know I have to review hot topics. So again, if you're tuning in for the first time, I usually do hot topics in the beginning. So I'm just going to do a couple of hot topics just so that we can jump right into today's leadership topic. Well, this one is, again, more distractions. So apparently the January 6th committee pardons are void. Now, what do you mean? I know you're probably thinking, oh, do you mean the January 6th rioters? No, I'm referring to and let me just read the article so that you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. I just put my glasses on to read it. Sorry, guys, but I just want to read this to you real quick. So it says here, President Trump is claiming without evidence that some of former President Joe Biden's actions are invalid because he allegedly used a machine to automate signatures on documents, which is a long-standing practice in the White House. In a late-night Truth Social post, Trump said his predecessor's preemptive pardons of members of the House committee investigating the January 6th insurrections are hereby declared void, vacant, and of no further force of effect, because of the fact that they were done by autopen. I don't know. It's like this stuff just gets better. It just keeps getting better and better. How about France wants their gift back? Yeah, they want the Statue of Liberty back. Did you guys hear about that? Now, this was in an article from the New York Post and a few other news articles. I'll read you the one from USA Today. Give us back the Statue of Liberty, said French members of the European Parliament. The Statue of Liberty, you guys know the story of the Statue of Liberty, right? You know the Statue of Liberty was given to us as a gift, to make a long story short, for the Declaration of Independence. Now, the French is saying that we are no longer worthy. A French politician who was making headlines in his country for suggesting that the U.S. is no longer worthy of the monument that was a gift from France nearly 140 years ago. This is in a different political reporting article. So apparently we're no longer worthy because of now this is what happens when leadership changes and when you have someone who comes into a leadership position and starts to make decisions without thinking about the consequences of their decision or how their decisions will have a domino effect on everything and everyone. I think that's actually a great segue going into our discussion talking about leadership. We're kicking off week 1 of NURS201 with a discussion on recognizing burnout, imposter syndrome, and leadership. We're going to break down the different leadership styles and explore the transition from bedside to leadership. The first thing I want to talk about is really recognizing burnout, bias, and imposter syndrome in leadership. Burnout is not just feeling tired, it's emotional exhaustion, that depersonalization, and that diminished feeling of personal accomplishment. You start to feel drained, you start to feel cynical, and all of these things can impact your leadership. Now, burnout isn't just about feeling tired. It's emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and that reduce personal accomplishment. So as a nurse, you might feel drained, cynical, or even question your impact. And as a leader, burnout can trickle down to your team. And you have to ask yourself, have you ever felt this way? And if so, you're not alone. And you need to recognize that. Another thing is bias. There's bias that takes place in leadership, and bias shows up in different ways. So I wrote a book, Confessions of a Nurse Executive: The Conscious and Unconscious Bias in Healthcare. That was my subtitle. And that's because, again, and I want to backtrack a little bit and just expand a little bit more on burnout and bias. Now, there are little lifestyle shifts that you can do to help you reclaim your life if you're going through burnout, or if you're recognizing it. There are things you can do. Exercise, for one, incorporating journaling in your day, having some type of routine. And let me break this down. So maybe in the morning, you have a morning routine where you get up and you journal, where you meditate, you give yourself some self-time. And then you also incorporate exercise. The biggest tip that I can probably give you is having boundaries and understanding that no is a complete sentence. These are the things that are going to help you to combat burnout. And I talk about this I have a guide to beat burnout, and I'll make sure that it's in the show notes so that you can access it. Some of the things that are in the guide, and I'll share with you, is physical activity, having a routine. Maybe you start to incorporate some type of exercise, even if it's just 10 minutes. Maybe you meditate. You start to take time to take care of yourself in the morning. Like, let that just be your self time. Maybe you start to journal in the morning. Putting things down on paper can be so powerful. When you start to write out your visions, when you start to write out your thoughts, it can be really powerful. Another strategy to overcome burnout: saying no, setting boundaries, and understanding that no is a complete sentence. It will really help you to reclaim your energy and set boundaries. Your boundaries should be as large as the state you live in. and I say that, and I mean that seriously, because you have to learn how to say no. And someone shared this with me some time ago, and they said, when you're constantly saying yes to something, you're saying no to yourself for something. What happens is you end up becoming resentful, and you don't want that, because we want to help people, but we don't want to sacrifice our own well-being in the meantime. The key in breaking through burnout, it lies in you taking control of your career and your financial future. Nurses are natural caregivers and leaders. So there's a leadership quality that is already inside of you. You just have to be able to identify it. That leadership quality makes you that much more suitable for entrepreneurship. And how you can get started on your wealth journey. And again, and these things are in the guide. I'm just going to just name them off, and you can review the guide, because I want to talk about bias a little bit. But when you talk about your wealth journey, what you want to look at is you want to evaluate your career. Where are you in your career? What paths are you exploring? You should start to explore new paths. Start building generational wealth. Start to look for different passive income streams. These are the things that we should be looking at. If you're experiencing burnout, understand the key is to recognize what you're going through, recognize that you're not alone, recognize that others have been through it, recognizing the symptoms, recognizing the causes, whether it's excessive workloads, whether it's lack of autonomy, or the age-old favorite, poor work-life balance. The factors can just leave you feeling very undervalued, and you have to be the one to choose you. And sometimes when you're dealing with things like bias in the workplace, which is what I was dealing with, sometimes it can really hinder your growth. And you have to be able to identify it. You have to be able to identify what bias looks like. The way I broke it down in my book, I broke it down with conscious and unconscious bias. And when you think about unconscious bias, let's talk about conscious bias first. Conscious bias, it refers to deliberate, intentional actions. And what do I mean? Now, maybe their attitudes or their prejudice is just obvious. They do things intentionally. So for example, your hiring manager may not choose a particular candidate, though they're qualified, but it's because of their ethnic background and because they believe they're less qualified. Or a nurse refusing to treat a patient based on their gender identity or their sexual orientation. Or a patient choosing to refuse a caregiver based on their identity or their racial or ethnic background. And then you have the unconscious bias. Now, this is the one that's really, really tricky. Your unconscious bias, that's more referring to stereotypes. Stereotypes can influence a person's decision making without them even realizing it. So that's your unconscious bias. These biases are shaped by your background or your culture. And it's because it's unconscious, people may automatically do it and not realize it. An example of unconscious bias is a doctor assuming that a male patient is more knowledgeable about a specific condition than a female patient. Sometimes society automatically associate doctors with males, or sometimes society automatically associate nurses with female. Or maybe nurses associate leadership roles like CEOs as a male role, as opposed to that being a woman's role. And these are lighter examples, but it's just to give you the analogy of what conscious and unconscious bias can look like. Both conscious and unconscious bias can impact healthcare, workplace diversity, and patient care. Recognizing and addressing the biases is crucial to creating a diverse and inclusive environment. And I can discuss this in depth because bias shows up in many different ways. Who gets promoted? Who gets mentored? Who feels seen in leadership roles? We need to be aware of both conscious and unconscious bias. And these type of things can lead to imposter syndrome. So then you have imposter syndrome, and it's that little voice that makes you question, am I qualified? That's imposter syndrome. Many nurse leaders deal with this, especially those who are just stepping up from the bedside. They experience this a lot. The key is recognizing it and shifting your mindset. The key is mindset plays a huge factor when it comes to bias, when it comes to burnout, and when it comes to imposter syndrome. You have to feel empowered, you have to be confident, and you have to make sure that you're putting things in place for your self-care. Because if you don't do these things, you're going to continue to experience the imposter syndrome and all of the above. I recently went to lunch with someone who is becoming so near and dear to me. I recently went to lunch with my accountability partner, and she is like a phenomenal woman, let me tell you. And she knows everyone. She's like such a people person. You know, she inspires me. Like, I thought I was a talker, and she can, and I thought I could talk to anyone. She can talk to anyone. And I love that about her. And, she's writing a book, and we were going through writing a book, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about that too in one of the episodes, but we were talking about, her book that she wants to write. She goes, what am I doing? What if no one reads it? Does anyone want to hear this? And I was just like, do you hear yourself? You are definitely going through imposter syndrome. And this is a phenomenal woman. This is someone who, let me tell you, this is someone who was recently, and I'm talking recently, like October, November of 2024, was a part in a documentary. She's been an extra on different movies. Not that that's the only thing that makes her. Let's be clear. She's someone who was able to acquire over $1 million in scholarship funding for her children. She's someone who teaches other people how to do the same thing. I can go on and on about this woman. She's such a phenomenal woman. She has resources at JP Morgan Chase. She has, all right. I say all of this to say we all experience imposter syndrome at some point or another. We have to be able to recognize it and shift our mindset so that we can overcome it. And that's key. And that's what's most important. So I'm going to go move on because I was starting to go down a rabbit hole there. And that's really the point of what I'm trying to say. Now, I want to talk to you about the types of leadership. And hopefully you'll be able to recognize your type of leadership, the type of leader that you want to be and the type of leader you don't want to be. And one of the first types of leadership that I want to talk about is transformational leadership. Transformational leadership is that leader that everyone wanted to be a few years ago. And I think maybe still now, right? Maybe still now. Transformational leaders, they are visionaries. They're inspiring. They push you. They push for change and for growth. And think of leaders who motivate teams towards a greater mission. That's your transformational leader. Now, your servant leadership, think of servant leader, think of a servant. They're prioritize their teams. They prioritize their team's needs, ensuring that they have what they need to be successful. It's about serving before leading. So that's your servant leader. Then you have your situational leaderships. And this leadership style adapts based on circumstances. So some situations calls for a hands-off approach, while others may need direct guidance. And I'm going to use myself as to explain the different type of leadership styles. So transformational leadership. An example of transformational leadership is starting a community. I'm a member of the Queens Entrepreneur Group, and in the Queens Entrepreneur Group, we provide resources. Now, the same accountability partner that I was just telling you about, that, we were talking about the imposter syndrome, she created a group that we're in. It's called the Queens Entrepreneur Group. Within that group, we provide resources to one another, right? To help inspire one another, to help to network, to help people understand what's going on in the community. That's how we support one another. And that's transformational leadership, creating a group, and within that group, providing resources, providing to inspire and motivate each other for career growth and for business growth. That's an example of transformational leadership. You're building up a network. You're building someone up. An example of servant leadership is when I mentor other nurses to help them to start their own businesses. That's an example of servant leadership, because I'm providing a service to them, and I'm helping nurses who are struggling with bias and burnout to transition from bedside or transition to start their own business. I'm providing them a service, and I'm putting their needs before mine. Part of that is ensuring that they have the tools that they need to build their businesses or to elevate in their career. And then when you talk about situational leadership, now my wellness business, situational leadership was me needing to adjust my leadership approach when it comes to hiring and mentoring new nurses for my wellness business. So that's more of a situational leadership, mentoring them on the processes and gradually giving them more autonomy as they gain more experience. Now, when we talk about shifting from bedside to leadership, this shift is more than just about a title. It's about shifting your mindset. The bedside, you focus on direct patient care. In leadership, your responsibility expands to policies, people management, and organizational goals. It's a big shift, but with the right tools, is possible. And when I say tools, I mean the tools that you need to keep your mindset in place. And when I say tools, it's tools that you need to stay confident, the tools that you need for a growth mindset. Now, what is growth mindset? So your growth mindset is basically your belief in yourself, your confidence in yourself, that your intelligence and your abilities are enough or can be developed through hard work. And it's a contrast to a fixed mindset. Now, a fixed mindset believes that their talents and intelligence are static. So in leadership, having a growth mindset means you have to embrace challenges, because they're always going to be there, and you have to be flexible. I there was a nurse who she used to work for me, and she was very I don't want to offend anyone. She was very ER. So to my ER nurses, don't get offended. But she was very, and I don't know, but I don't know if this was ER though, because ER nurses are generally kind of like laid back. She was more very, well, I need this, and I've seen her type before. And I've seen the type where, as a nurse leader, I've seen the type where very, well, what about this? What about that? What about that? And it's not so much a type A personality. It's just more, you need to know every detail, and I get it. But in business, and if something like doesn't go exactly how you think it's going to go, you're freaking out. And you cannot be that way in leadership, and you can't be that way in business either. And when I say there needs to be more, you have to be prepared for challenges, because you are going to have challenges. And if you freak out every time something doesn't go as planned, you're not going to make it in leadership, and you're definitely not going to make it in business, because you have to have a level of flexibility for that unknown. You have to have a level of flexibility for when things don't go as planned. So I think we've covered quite a bit. So for this week, your assignment is to complete your self-assessment. This will help you to identify your personal strengths and areas for growth. I'll post a few links to assessments in the show notes, and I want you to reflect on your results and think about what leadership style resonates with you. So that's a wrap, class. Make sure you subscribe. Share the episode, and connect with me on social. Let's keep this leadership journey going. We have 3 more weeks. Until next time, make sure that you stay inspired, stay educated, and stay empowered.